From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. James, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How about yourself, Steve?
I'm doing well. I'm real excited. Today's going to be a really fun and interesting show. We have someone who's joining us who should be familiar to our audience, but is very familiar to me and also to James. He is my other half, my partner at A State of Control. He's known as Uncle Richie to some, but his name is Rich Fregosa. Welcome, Rich. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, this is great being on. I mean, I normally bull my way through fireside chats on our shows, but to be an actual interviewee, this might be a first for me. I almost feel like I need to tagline it with, "This is Ask the Programmer." Thanks for having me on. This is great. I've been following your guys' show, and I couldn't be prouder of from the periphery of what you guys are doing, and the more stuff that we can get out there for our programming community, so much the better.
Well, thanks for that. And James and I really wanted you to join us a few reasons. One, for you and me, we wanted to congratulate you on 100 episodes of A State of Control, which is something that I know that we recently recorded and we both took a lot of pride in, and it was a bit of a sentimental moment. And I think that's something that we should share a little bit about. And we also wanted you to be able to share a little bit about your background, because we want to be able to tell people stories here, and we want everyone to get to know you a little bit better, and also maybe hear some of what's been going on in the early days and how far we've come. Because for some that are new to this, it wasn't always like this back in the day.
Yeah, I think what's the term they call us, the old heads these days. I think starting first with episode 100, it was special. It was. I don't think when we started the show that we expected 9 years later that we would, be feeling as energized and kind of hitting with the same energy. I think sometimes we didn't know, if you'd asked us 9 years ago if we'd still be wanting to do this 9 years later, that we'd be around. But there we were, and it was kind of the organic part of how AV Nation started in the beginning. I mean, AV Nation, we've talked about it on other shows, and our good friend Tim Albright, who started the whole shebang, along with Bradford and Matt and others, but it was kind of Tim's brainchild. Was it started all one day with Google Hangouts, and we were sending out. It was right when it was being introduced, and a couple of people were like, "Well, hey, let's get together." And people from different parts of the industry who hadn't met each other got on a show one day and said, "Let's try recording it and see what happens." And as they say, the rest is history. It started really from that show that started with AV Week and got everybody together, and kind of caught on to, there's some other verticals. And we looked at, the education sector and enterprise and social. And, there were so many interesting shows in the early days. And, you and I were just talking, before we started recording, it wasn't like there was this hit list of shows that we needed to hit, and then it was this talent search. It was, I honestly, and I mean, it almost seems like we've always been doing the show, that I don't always remember how it started, but it pretty much started with, we recorded one of the shows, and really it's when you and I mean, we knew of one another, but we didn't know each other. It was the first time for our personalities to get together, and you came up with the, hey, well, why not a programming show? And I think Tim had looked, he was like, "Well, Rich, you want to do it?" I'm like, "No, Steve's the guy for it." And I mean, you literally jumped in with both feet, and it just kind of happened. And then basically running monthly for 9 years, it's been wild. And it's like, I talk about like my business, that it's the same thing with my business. It's the same thing with these podcasts. Is I'm just glad I get to do stuff with my friends. There's not a lot of business sectors out there, and there's not a lot of people I talk to, outside of our industry, that I tell them, yeah, I'm just doing this with my buddies. How long you know? I've known them for years. And what we do these podcasts or we work together. And you don't hear that often, that like, people just get together and do projects with their friends and they get paid for it. And so, I think with the state of control, that's always been the best part, because I know at least once a month I'm going to run into an old friend or I get to make a new one. And along the way, we've talked about it over the years. And you and I are, I don't think we are vocal about it always, but it's always the underlying nature of who we are, is that we've always been about reach one, teach one. And we've always called it the tribal knowledge, right? Passing the tribal knowledge, which was the experience and the wisdom that came from doing all of these things. And there's lots of different ways to get to how we are, and to having companies like ours and being in positions like ours and making a living like we do, that not necessarily means coming from a computer science track. We were talking about it earlier. I never intended to be a programmer. I know for several years I'd get introduced as, oh, this is the program, and I'd still bristle and I want to say XYZ. I'm like, after a while you're like, yep, that's who I am. But I actually started in sales. I was a sales guy, and I had a computer background. It was just, I was a child of the I was born in '70s, so I was literally that first generation of kids where I always had two things that were kind of common threads in my life as a kid, as I always had tech and computers, and I was always selling. I was the kid selling candy bars and doing all of the sales competitions as a kid for school, and hustling, and always had a hustle. When I was a kid, I was I think my first job, I was 9 and I sold sodas at Candlestick Park. And so I used to, that was my first gig. I'd ride the bus. It was a 20-minute bus ride to the games and sell, hawk sodas and hot dogs and everything. And that was take the bus out and take the bus back through not exactly the nicest neighborhoods in San Francisco, but that at the same time at 9, I had that hustle. And my buddies and I remember he got his first, it was an Atari 5200 with the whopping, I want to say it was either the 8K or 16K cartridge. And now keep in mind that none of this you could store. It was ROM. So we would go over to his house and load up on sodas and chips and snacks and whatever, and we would start at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and we would code, and we would just code in BASIC, and we'd make blackjack games or everything like that. And like you'd build a working blackjack game, and you'd work until like 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you'd have to turn it off and it was gone.
So, Rich, I'll pull a Bradford Ben here, and you use an acronym, ROM. Now, of course, I know what it is. I'm sure Steve does, but you got to find it and explain how that impacts programmers.
Read-only memory, ROM, had 2 options, and it relates to the Crestron side of things with their EEPROMs, which was the next iteration down the road. But you had a memory chip that would only retain the information as long as it was powered on, and the minute that it lost power, that information was gone. But at that time, the technology was the fact that you could do it in the first place was pretty amazing, because prior to that, you had the what was it, the keyboards, the typewriters that would have the one line of text, and that was the word processors. Yeah. Word processors. That was the iteration before, where you had a single line of text, and the only memory that you had available was that character set. I mean, so you weren't even talking 8K. You were talking like bytes of information. But we've gone from that, where we've gone from having to deal with a byte of information to terabytes of information over the course of my lifetime, and hopefully I've got more. in my lifetime now. But I mean, I'd say the past 40 years that we've seen that transformation. But for the younger guys, that was something that the older programmers, we had a limited amount of resources. We couldn't just throw on more RAM or more expansion or any of these things. When we all started out, we were told, here's a processor, here's X amount of information on it, not one drop more. and away you go. So the old ones were ROM, and so we started out as I started out as a little kid programmer, and I remember I got my first computer. It was probably like a 386 or something like that, and going on to being able to get on pre-internet, they used to call them bulletin board services, where you'd hook up your phone and you dial a number, and other people with computers would dial these numbers, and it's almost the equivalent now of prehistoric Discord is probably the way that I would call it. You would get people dialing in from all over the city or the state or the country as they grew, and you would have forums and people would exchange information, and there were programming forums, and you'd figure out how to work your way into, the fun thing used to be is you'd dial phone numbers, you'd see you'd start on the phone book, you'd start with a phone number list, and you'd pick an industry, like, oh, let's pick a bank, let's pick this business, and you'd start dialing through numbers, and if you heard a tone or something, that was sport as a kid, right? And you talk about the early hackers, that's like, those were the kids who were doing it. It wasn't like some plan, like it wasn't it wasn't war games at that point. It was just little kids farting around trying to see what they could do, and I was one of them at that point. But
isn't that how we all kind of get into any kind of tech? Is, let's see if we could break this. Like, what can we do to this? We're taking it out of the box and modifying it some way, somehow, to fit our needs. That's what we all do.
It was fun. It still is fun. I'm 100% with that. And it was when we started out, like I said, I guess I probably shouldn't be surprised that I found myself in this position. I just think in the beginning that's not where I intended to go, because I'd always stayed with tech, I'd always stayed with sales, I'd stayed with the arts. I performed, from the time I was 12 on. I used to do video. I went to film school. All things. I went for video production, and as a teenager, we had our own the school that I was at, and we were fortunate we had our own in-house television station. So even being an announcer and being on air and all of those things, it's funny to think that those were all kind of laying the seeds at that point. But we used to do the morning telecast, and I would go out and do on-field interviews, and the last years with one of my buddies, I got to be the technical director, and we used to run the productions, and and then went off to school, and it was trying to figure out how to I think when I got there, I discovered that I didn't want to make corporate videos for a living. And that's when things started turning. I'm like, this is not nearly as fun as a job as I thought it was going to be. And I had gone to NYU, had gone to Tisch at NYU, and I went, not for me, and came back to San Francisco. And of all things, I laugh. People were like, how did you get started? Pure accident. I came back from school, didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to meet interesting people. And so I decided that I was going to at Fisherman's Wharf, and you'll see them in tourist destinations like in Hawaii and other places. This place called Pearls in the Oyster, and I decided that I wanted to date tourists, so I got a job at Pearls in the Oyster. And I'd gotten back from school, and a friend of mine ran into me just out of the blue walking Fisherman's Wharf, and he said, hey, I've got this gig that you might be interested in. And I was like, well, what's that? He said, well, there's this stereo store, big retailer, they were called The Good Guys. He said, we're doing all of the installations for them of these in-wall speakers. I'm like, oh wow, that's kind of cool. And he's like, do you want a gig? And so I'm like, well, yeah, I'm sitting here selling pearls, that sounds like a whole lot more fun. And my entry into the industry. Keep in mind I had sales background, I had tech background, all of these things. But I apprenticed for him for 3 months as an installer. And I discovered I was the worst installer on the planet. I to the day, I remember, he still kids me about this. I didn't think that wire strippers made any sense. And I came to him one day when I was trying to trim some wires, and I showed him my cool kit and what I had learned as a skill. And I had nail trimmers, and I was using the nail trimmers to skin the jacket. And I thought I had invented fire, and he just kind of looked at me. So that gives you the idea early on of my technical skills. And and these are kind of the Uncle Richie fireside chats that, hopefully, if anybody comes across and meets me at any of the shows or something, pull me over and say hi. If I'm sitting somewhere and we have a drink, it's just like, Steve will tell you, we've had so many dinners and so many times where we're sitting over the years where I'm just like, I can't make up the things that have happened to me, and relating the stories that are just fun, that it's what makes it what we worked on. And so, yeah, I remember the day that I decided that I was not going to be an installer. We were doing a restaurant, and it was the night of the critics dinner, so everything wasn't still quite done. Scaffolds and stuff were done, and still stuff needed to go in. They were starting to take the scaffolds down, and we still had some speakers that we had to put in. And so I'm 20 something, almost 30 feet off the ground. I get up into the scaffold, and I'm not a tall guy, man, everybody knows that. And I've got a speaker in one hand and a drill in the other, and I reach up, and I'm like 2 feet short of the ceiling. I'm on a scaffold, mind you, and it's kind of moving, and I'm looking around going, what do I do? And I'm asking like one of the old guys, one of the old painters or something, and I'm like, what do I do? And he looks at me, kid you not, he says, this is construction, son. Grab a paint bucket.
Oh no.
Obviously, OSHA was not watching what was happening at that moment. I remember being on this scaffold on this little bucket, swaying back and forth, getting this thing and going, if I get through this, I am never, ever doing this again. That was my last install job at that point. And from there, like I said, I'm still good friends with the guy who got me started. I went to, I found a boutique high-end audio store in San Francisco. And again, always had dealt with computers, always dealt with sales. I was kind of really good with it. I wound up getting there as a salesman originally, and custom AV was still a brand new thing. I found out I was really good at databases and gathering information. And so my first job in custom was I became their director of custom, because I finally figured out that I could go to all of the local permit offices in the San Francisco Bay Area. And keep in mind, I'm in San Francisco, and so these are high income areas, and figured out that every few weeks I could just basically drive around and pull all of the permits for new construction and high-end renovations. And what I did is I built a computer program that we input all of that data, and then we targeted high-income renovations and permits and everything else based on the permit cost, and built a marketing plan. And that was kind of the first part of the gig, that apart from the programming side, that I built their custom division. And it was funny is that, I left a couple of years later, I'd go back and see them. They were still using the same software that I had built all those years before, because they were like, well, it works. And the next go around I got into, and how I got into the programming side was a good friend of mine, Adam Stone, who was the founder of D-Tools, who is now enjoying his semi-retirement in the Far East. He and I and a whole bunch of integrators were at a lunch one day. And it's funny, we always talk about we always felt like we were kind of an Old Testament story, because there was a bunch of us that sat at one table who've gone on to do other things in the industry. And we all met at one Niles audio training, with old names that you'll hear of and you see in these magazines and everything else. And he and I got together, and he was like, hey, I've got this custom gig that I'm doing. I've got some other stuff. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds like fun too. Let's go do that. And that was, we were called Satellite. Gosh, I don't even remember the name of the old company, but we were Home Theater by Satellite TV Center. We used to sell satellite dishes, and we moved into custom, and we got into this automation thing in 1991. Tail end of 1991 was the first Crestron processor that I got my hands on. Went through my first training, and he would always deny it, but our good friend Freddie Bargetzi was my trainer for my first Crestron class, and also the only person who's ever thrown me out of a class. And he would deny it day in and day out. I'm like, I was there. But anyway, I was the sales guy when we started with Crestron. And again, programming, I thought it was cool, but I was marketing, I was design, I was all of the other things. Programming was not something that I intended to do. I wanted somebody else to do it. And we had one at the time. We had a guy who worked for us who was going to be, quote unquote, the programmer. And we were in the middle of a job. And I remember to the day, it was 1992. And I had just sold, for this time was a big deal. I had sold my first 6-figure job in 1992, residential, for basically a room, a theater, full packed theater, double stack projectors and early THX. I mean, crazy stuff. And we had a very specific deadline to reach, and the client was great guy. So we're going through the project, and we're getting towards the tail end of the project. So we had the equipment in, we're getting ready to start commissioning, and my programmer had a tragic family accident. And long story short, my programmer had to abruptly quit. He leaves. We have no programmer. I call the client, and I start explaining it, and he goes, I hear what you're saying. I empathize what's going on, but you've signed on to finish a deal, and I expect the job to be done. Adam and I kind of looked at each other and went, here we go. And I, again, it sounds like one of those stories that it shouldn't be true, but I locked myself in my office for 2 weeks, picked up the Crestron software, and at that time it was Crestron Workshop. We were still in DOS, and spent 2 weeks teaching myself how to code in Crestron Workshop and put together our early panels of the Crestron software. And from that day, I am now 30 years later talking in front of you as a reluctant, unexpected Crestron programmer. It kind of went from there, and then so that was our first job. And so we were integrators at the time. Fast forward a couple of years, Adam was looking to do different things, obviously great things. I wanted to kind of figure out the next step for myself, and I went into the consulting side, and had a couple of partners that we got together with in the mid 90s, and became the kind of my brainchild. Was we built a bespoke custom programming division where we were one of a handful of the first, I guess now what we call it, the early CSPs. So
the capes back then.
Back then. And so, yeah, we were one of the very first residential. Now, there were quite a few that were doing it in the commercial and education, everything else, but we were one of the first residential contract programming groups during that period of time. And we got to work with everybody. So we were not only doing Crestron, we were doing AMX, we were doing everybody at the time. And it was fun because, yeah, like Steve remembers, this is when you still had direct extension numbers to everybody. And a lot of the people that you see in the industry and a lot of the people that we know all go back to that mid 90s, early 2000 period of we were all around the same age, all starting out in our careers, and we've all branched out into different things. But it's great to see that, everybody still has that bond together. And and then kind of worked our way up, and we built that, and we had a great time. We had some fantastic projects. We grew the company. And I got to the point where the company was doing really well that I wasn't having fun. And I discovered halfway through that as much as I enjoyed the growth of the company, I wasn't really having a lot of fun managing the people. The people that I was working with were getting to do the stuff, and I just got to move the pieces around. And so in 2000, I decided to branch back off on my own and hung my name on the shingle and decided that we were going to kind of work on the, we coined the term, we went the digital concierge route. And so we decided to work kind of bespoke and work very quietly and kind of in the background with a bunch of integrators across the country. And we've really enjoyed kind of being the support structure without any of the limelight on us. And so over the course of, I guess 22 years, had some fantastic friendships and business relationships that we formed with a lot of integrators across the country and other programming firms. And we like coming in and kind of being the Swiss Army knife. We went from being programming only when I was on the consulting side, got back into design and project management and client liaison, contract negotiation, and fortunately, since we have the ability, since we're small, to kind of pick and choose, we get to work when Resi was down for a bit, we refocused on commercial, and commercial was great, and we had a whole lot of fun doing that. And then when we saw a dip in commercial, we're able to go to Resi and educational, and so we're kind of fortunate in that we get to play in a lot of different playgrounds with others. And so maybe I'm just stubborn that way. I didn't want to focus on one thing. I liked learning too much and meeting everybody else, that doing something 50 stories up in a executive boardroom was just as thrilling for us as doing a 25-seat movie theater and or doing a lecture hall. And we're fortunate that we've been able to consistently work in all three of those across the way and play. And it's been interesting, like I said, and it's exposed me to everybody here. I mean, I think if I had concentrated in just one vertical, I wouldn't have the breadth and the experience that I could draw upon. And that's the big thing with longevity, is that I've just got a list of people I know that if I'm in over my head, I can call. And I think for programmers, that's the hardest part, right? Is being able to learn that it's okay to pick up the phone. It's okay to reach out, and we have the tools now to do it. So 30 something odd years later, from selling Cokes and coding blackjack games to fireside chats with Uncle Richie.
See, I could sit here and listen to you talk all day, Uncle Richard and Richie, and I'm sure all our listeners can. But I think that's a great stopping point and get to wrap this up. I know, Steve, you've been kind of quiet there. You have anything to add?
No, I just like listening as well. And I think, a couple of things that came to mind for me was that, one, these are the types of stories that really inspire podcasts. And this is also what makes building this community so important, because we need to be able to share these stories, and we need to be able to have those contacts and be exposed to the connections. And everybody has a different route that they took. And I'm fascinated because I didn't even know all of this, and I've known Rich for a long time. So I've known bits and pieces of it over the years, but it's, I think everybody could take away something from these types of stories.
And absolutely. I think that it's okay to bring different things to the party. In fact, I encourage it. I think that, especially this industry, you have to have your finger on the pulse of so many different things, that the more experiences and pitfalls, and again, I mean, I'm bringing up the high points of my career. Probably the most wisdom and
another
experience.
episode for the low points.
Exactly. There's a whole lot. We could run a whole episode on let me show you the ways I screwed up. And but this is at least the I guess it's fitting at the end of the year to be able to kind of reminisce on 30 years in.
Well, I think it's real important, and we will wrap up. But I think the thing that to get from this, for those of you out there listening, is that most people have taken an indirect journey to get to where they are, and also just think about the different choices that Rich made, and think about the different ways that he's been able to reinvent himself, but also the fact that he's built up this asset that he can always fall back to. And I think that that's really what makes what we do so cool and so different from many other industries. Rich, how we are going to have you back, but how can people get in touch with you, learn more about what you're up to, certainly share about A State of Control as well?
Absolutely. If you want to find me, you can find me on the socials. At Fregosa is usually most of them. If you want to find out about the company or more information, you can find us fregosadesign.com. You can type my name into the interwebs, and interesting things always come up. But yeah, if you want to find other spots, I'm glad that you have me here. But we have a couple of shows on AV Nation, avnation.tv. You can find me with Steve, State of Control, as we prepare for episode 101 through in our run. I call it the run to 200, as Steve and I prepare for the run to 200 for the next 9 years. But yeah, you can find us there as well. But yeah, thanks for having me, man. This was I'm always more interested in hearing everybody else, because I find everybody else far more fascinating than me. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of, I guess kind of walk a couple of steps through my life. As I guess I'm getting older, I kind of scratch my head going, I managed to do that. And I was like, boy, there was a lot of ways it could have gone wrong, but I guess I got lucky along the way.
Absolutely. And I thank you for sharing, and thank you for also enlightening our audience, because as you said before, we're kind of in that mode of needing to pass along knowledge and help the next generation fill our shoes. So James, any closing thoughts from you, and how can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you're up to?
So closing thoughts. One, I want to thank Richie for joining us. This is like, I'm trying to, how do you say this? It's like when that grandparent comes over for the holiday and you just find yourself sitting on the floor, engage in all the stories. And that's why I loved State of Control and all this. Just hearing the history and this, I didn't want to stop. Like, it was like I could go on all day listening to this. It was great. So thank you, Richie. And again, you guys can find me Twitter, AV_James King. I'm out there. Google me. You will definitely find me.
And for me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media, my company, controlconcepts.net, where I do some writing there, and with some other publications. And of course, on the monthly State of Control with Rich. And we're going to, our agents have done a good job of extending our contract. So we'll be back for as long as they'll have us, and we'll continue that journey. But we look at this show as being a nice complement to that. And if you want to get involved in this or A State of Control, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you. We want to continue to highlight our audience, and both answer the questions that people are curious about with regard to programming and control, as well as being able to share some more of the different aspects of the industry and what pertains to our special corner of and our niche in AV. Please check us out on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and so forth. Leave a rating, review, share an episode. We really like to hear from you. And we are also approaching episode 100, so we're excited about that as well. So please check us out and share us with your friends. And that's what we have for today. And this has been Ask the Programmer.